Today we're speaking about how including gender perspectives and mainstreaming it in mobility has been done in 3 very different countries. It is, of course, an exciting time. We have celebrated International Women's Day just yesterday, and we're surrounded today by an all-female panel, including myself. We have 3 ITDP representatives who present how their work in the region has advanced and evolved around gender and what lessons learned and tools other cities can learn from them. So we will first actually start with the session moderator, Ana Nassar, who is the program director at ITDP Brazil and who also has a deep passion for gender work. Then we'll pass it on to the presenters who include first Anggi Siregar, who is a senior urban planning associate, specializing in gender and social inclusion at ITDP Indonesia. She will cover some of the work around inclusive processes in public transport in Jakarta, specifically through the gender focus in electrification initiatives that ITDP Indonesia has been helping with. Second, we'll hear from Lorena Freitas of ITDP Brazil. Lorena is a coordinator for the travel demand program in the region, overlooking some of the gender and race related initiatives in public transport. So we will hear some insights from that work in recent years. And then finally, we'll hear from Caroline Mimano, who is a partnerships and communications manager at ITDP Africa. Caroline will talk about some of the engagement and gender-focused data gathering initiatives around the Cairo BRT. So with that, I'm very happy to pass this to Ana for a brief opening.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ivona. Hello, everyone. Good morning from São Paulo. Good afternoon, good evening to participants from other parts of the world. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar, where we will learn more about the challenges and opportunities to bring a new gender perspective to mobility planning, influencing how transport systems and cities are designed and how they function. Before we start the presentations and listen to ongoing efforts in Brazil, Indonesia, and Egypt, I would like to point out a few aspects that show why this topic is so important. Transport systems in most cities have been designed for the male commuter, and no gender perspective has been considered in design and operations. However, women travel differently than men, with different trip purposes, different characteristics, and different needs for access. Women still bear much of the burden of the care economy, including childcare, elder care, and household tasks. And the inequalities in the division of the domestic work affect directly their travel patterns. For instance, their displacements are marked by chain trips to multiple destinations, while for men, most trips are still single A to B type of trips. Another key aspect we see in Brazil, but certainly not only here, is that women's daily lives are marked by fear of urban violence, and this is key to understanding their mobility and accessibility in cities. Harassment and sexual violence deter women from having full access to opportunities and services available in cities, as we will see in the following presentations. Finally, it's important to highlight that women is not a monolithic idea. It's not one thing, it's not binary. So as we look for solutions to improve gender equality, we need to embrace intersectional approaches, looking at race, gender, age, income, class, and sexual orientation. In Brazil, for instance, urban life and vulnerability to violence are particularly challenging for Black and low-income women, for whom walking and public transport play a fundamental role in their everyday experience. Transformational change will require the recognition of all these aspects and their incorporation into transportation planning. Here at ITDP, we have been leading gender initiatives for quite some time. Women's Day is also to celebrate women's contribution and recognizing that elevating women's perspective and capacity mobility planning bears immense benefits to everyone. We will now learn how some cities have been working on changing their strategies to make urban mobility more accessible to women. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Angie, who will present a case study about Jakarta. Then Lorena will speak about the challenges and recommendations on race and gender in mobility based on projects implemented by ITDP Brazil. And finally, we'll have Caroline on gender-sensitive design for the Cairo BRT. So now over to you, Angie.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I hope you all have an access or can see my screen now. So, well, yeah, as introduced by Anna as well as Iwona, I'm now as an senior urban planning, gender and social inclusion associate from ITDP Indonesia, and now we have a lot of work on electrification. And talking about that, we really want to encourage this kind of like issues, especially talking more about women and other vulnerable groups can still be addressed well within this kind of like point of view. So a little bit more, giving you more backgrounds about our work in ITDP Indonesia and the correlations with this kind of like issues at this time. So actually, we are not only working on this issue starting within these recent years, but we have started about maybe in my very first years in ITDP within 2015. So back then, we always work on this kind of like society, women, and we are trying to work together with them. Some of key objectives are also about how we try to ensure about the universal designs can be applied well through all infrastructures and also can be adopted by the national or even the local regional governments. And it will make them easier to access the cities and other kind of like opportunities in terms of job, health, and also education. As maybe Anna mentioned before, our challenges here in Indonesia, we have adopted a planning with a zoning and spatial kind of like things, where we really believe it will make some of like hard issues and even kind of like some challenges and problems for women to access some of opportunities which is located far away from their houses. So we really want to encourage a fair and more opportunities for women and other vulnerable groups in the city can be available and easy to access. And the other things why we have to work with them, with the women and other vulnerable groups, since we want to increase their safety and also health environment for women, especially where they want to develop themselves to get more opportunities. And we really know that it will create a very long-term impact to the society. And we also think that this kind of like approach would help to sustainable transition, which lead to sustainable neighborhood and also sustainable mobility within the city. So ITDP works in Jakarta, specifically have to work with some of like groups, and we are trying collaborative planning process. We met a lot of women groups, women representatives, women activists, just like to have basic knowledge and better understandings about what are the needs and then how we can work together and let their voices can be heard well by the officials. So we conduct joint surveys and also collaborative and also co-design process. We also work together on doing audits, such as how we want to assess how proper the infrastructures are. And we really want to have a very intense and also like a very close relationship with women. So we work also with women who live in Kampung in Jakarta. Number of activities of ITDP Indonesia, you can check in our website, itdp-indonesia.org, or you can also access number of publications and also our YouTube channel if you want to see number of videos talking more about the audits. One of the videos titled Women and the City, but unfortunately it's available in Bahasa. But it will be okay for you just like to get more image or illustrations about what we've done in Jakarta. And we also have one of like initiative with the women in cycling, what we call Puan-Puan Bersepeda in Instagram, and you also can check them out. where we also produce number of the Spotify and also episodes in Spotify that you can also listen to. But unfortunately, once again, it's available in Bahasa. However, we start to work with women and also start to develop with the methodologies, and we also launch number of applications related with how we try to implement collaborative planning process. And this kind of like publication has been also available in English version. And this kind of like quite long process, but we really know that after we've done this kind of like process, we have a very close and better understanding about what the women need. And by understanding the needs of women, we understand that this kind of like process also broaden our knowledge about the needs coming from other vulnerable groups, since like they also have number of roles in families and societies. And they are not only act as career women, but also they somehow act as an moms, mothers, part of the societies, leaders, even though in society. So this kind of like approach methodologies that we've implemented during a number of our projects, it's really helped us to really implement the recommendations. So not only stop within giving a very strong recommendations to the officials, but also we in 2018, we can like really implement number of interventions which can be give benefit to the society, especially for women. And talking more about findings, so after we work together with women, we understand that based on our study in 2020 in 27 kampung kota in Jakarta, that women really rely on walking, cycling, and public transport services. In Jakarta, we have angkot. It's kind of like microbuses running by the public transport operators. Some of them are really managed well by Transjakarta, the BRT system, the bus rapid transit system. So it's really, really a big findings that should be followed up by very efficient and effective policies. But still, from this kind of like works together with women, we still understand that this kind of like issues, talking more about data, talking about how the solutions and the policies produced by officials, still a lot of things that we should work more. So in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta, some of the solutions given by the officials just like to put more special carriage, special buses, women-only buses, for example, or special car only for women, just like to react on number of the threats for women. So it's quite sad, but it's kind of like a really a number of discussions. We thought that this initiative could be seen as a very temporary interventions to be followed up with a very robust solutions or recommendations in the next time. So we believe within our assistance to officials, to the cities of Jakarta, we want to create this kind of like environment, built environment, really can accommodate the needs of women. So that's why we did a lot of audits with women, just like to ensure this kind of like facilities are built and also already accommodate the needs of the women. And talking more about the moving forward, about the next steps, about the recent issues within our world in transportation nowadays, talking more about the electrification. So we understand the number of opportunities available within this kind of like field of discussions. But then how we want to ensure this kind of like issues can still give opportunity to women, we see that we have to work together with women and other representatives and also need to have a lot of discussions with them, especially the public transport operators. Why? Because let's say for Transjakarta, it's still like less than 10% of women workers there. And we a bit worry a little bit about how the Transjakarta or the system can provide a better trainings for women drivers who has already experience as a driver in a conventional buses and then can transform into a driver for the electric buses. number of interventions. Also, we did number of the focus group discussions to have more understanding about what should be built in terms of the bus designs. So nowadays, if you are going to Jakarta, the electric buses now they already accommodated the design, such as a space for bags or some things that usually carried by women after going to the market, some of like that, because of our old buses, they do not have this kind of like space. And we put number of like adjustment on hand railing and such as number of the placement of seatings, just to consider the needs of women, because of this kind of like needs have been delivered or pointed out once we had number of the discussions. But still ongoing with this kind of like electrification issues is kind of like a bit opportunity and threats as well when we are talking more about the electrification or electric 2- and 3-wheelers. So here in Indonesia, if you're going to number of kampung, you can see like so many women went to the market, traditional market, for example, using the electric bikes. And number of them also have electric scooters or even like use the electric motorbikes. So in this kind of like situation where also the national government wants to subsidize the electric 2-wheelers, it's also kind of like being our in discussions, because we really want to help this kind of like transition, also put the lens of women, their kind of like ideas, their needs and their concerns in the pipeline. So within this kind of like project and activities, when we talk to them with the women, we ensure about the designs, the specifications, about what kind of like bikes, for example, e-bikes that will help you and also let you to drive it safely, for example, because of once we try to figure out about specific models like bikes and e-bikes and also e-motorbikes, they have a preference that which is different with the preferences given by the men. So it's kind of like a very crucial thing if we just want to let them go into this kind of like opportunities. Not only that, it's also help them just like to expand their border, and maybe it will give them another kind of like opportunities in terms of economic opportunities, because of it will help them also to act their roles in society and also in family, because of we believe that number of this kind of like women drivers, they have number of like obstacles and challenges to fulfill the roles in society. And they are still like worried about their capability or their ability to work or even like to drive the bikes, e-bikes or e-motorbikes. So once this kind of like things happened, we really want to still address that they still be heard, that they needs will be accommodated, will be addressed. So to understand that, we want to bring more kind of like discussions. So these studies actually are still going on, and we hopefully that we will also will produce a JETSI kind of like study mainstreaming in electrification later on in a couple months ahead. But we really want to grab this kind of like point of view, because of in Indonesia, specifically in Jakarta, women also can be seen in most of our public transportations, in our streets, in our roads, in number of like multi-modes as an options. But then talking more about the electrification, we don't want to miss them out. And we will like want to let them have the opportunities, because we really understand that it may also give them broad opportunities to join like job opportunities or even like the education opportunities. So it will also make them being creative, because we understand that it will also let them to get more exposures to the environment. So it will also let them to have a more efficient and effective ways on work. So this kind of like opportunities that we really want to work and develop in the electrification issues. I think that's for me to trigger the first discussions today, and I think we will also have follow-up, I think, and I'll pass it to Lorena. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I will make my presentation in Portuguese, so you can change the language channel to English if you want. Let me share my screen with you.
1, 2, 3, testing the interpretation.
Vocês conseguem ver minha tela? Can you see my screen? Ok, so vou começar aqui então, pessoal. Vou fazer a apresentação em português.
Let me get started. This presentation will be in Portuguese.
Ai, meu Deus, eu preciso... Desculpa, gente, eu preciso mudar o meu canal aqui.
My apologies, because I need to switch channels.
Ok, vamos lá. Então, gente, hoje eu vou falar um pouco aqui sobre
I will talk
mobilidade de mulheres, né, no Brasil, considerando a questão de gênero e raça.
In Brazil, taking into account both gender and race.
A gente no ITDP, a gente já vem trabalhando aqui no Brasil com a questão de gênero já tem um tempo.
Brazil, we've been working for a while with gender-based issues.
A gente percebeu em determinado momento que a gente trabalhar só com a questão de gênero,
we
né,
noticed that
padrão de mobilidade feminino,
with
não seria suficiente, então a gente começou a ter uma visão um pouco mais interseccional, trabalhando com gênero e raça.
Hi, Lorena.
Work with gender.
Hi, Lorena. Can you? I think you have to be actually in the outside of the Portuguese channel because we hear you together with the interpreter. So go back to the main room.
Okay, I'll stop share here. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm a little confused with this.
You can.
I'm like the grandmother.
No worries. You can put original audio interpretation off, I think.
Okay.
And let me know if that's working.
Eu deveria estar ouvindo a interpretação.
Can you hear the interpretation now?
Yes,
it seems it's working now.
Sorry. Vamos lá. Vamos fazer dar certo. Então, retomando aqui.
Okay, let me start again. At ITDP Brazil, we've been working for a while with gender issues. But at a given moment, in the midst of our society and considering the reality we live in, we thought that gender issues were not enough. So we've been working on gender-based issues with intersectionality. And I would like to address the reality of mobility among Black women in Brazil. And there are studies and indicators developed by ITDP that I will point out to during my presentation. And I can also share them with you over the chat. First, what we need to understand in Brazil is race. It is important to understand that in Brazil, we have Black, brown, and mestizo population, and the Black population is majority, but only for the most negative indicators. The engagement and participation of the Black population is reduced, but when it comes to living in poverty, to violence, or to illiteracy, that's when the Black population is majority. So in Brazil, you cannot talk or speak about society without including those significant differences. And you must also understand that inner cities The racial dynamic segregates that population. The working class has historically been the Black population at the base of the bottom of the pyramid, and that these are populations that live in favelas. They live in the outskirts of the cities. So whenever we lack of affirmative actions, there is difficulty to access to sports or to health or leisure related activities, and they can also engage with people living close to where their activities are conducted. This is why women move differently than men. Women displace and they move different than cisgender white men. So when urban planning is done, it is normally jotted down for young men who leave early from their house to travel to their office. But outside that commute and the work-related activities in the peripheral areas, there's scarcity of transportation offering. This is why this creates a major impact, especially on women, because the mobility network, the mobility conditions are completely different for the Black population, for the racialized populations, namely the female population. In São Paulo, the municipality has data that women need to move more in terms of loss and wasted time during the commute. Since transportation is not thought for women, since women are not including in the planning process, it is even a harsher relationship that women end up building with the city. In terms of the challenges faced by women in Brazil, this is a word cloud created in a forum within the Acorda Mobilidade project. It is not available in English, but if you know how to speak Portuguese, you should check it out because it explains racism and mobility. And it's all women rather not use transportation. And it's basically due to security. When we asked what they understand by security, it's, the general fear of theft or criminality, but it also includes a group of fears due to sexual violence and harassment. Women in Brazil are specifically vulnerable to harassment and to sexual violence in Brazil. A group of women were interviewed and 97% of women had been harassed in public transportation, and 71% of the interviewed women knew somebody who had been attacked in the public space. So gender is a blind spot of Brazilian mobility, and we have seen this. We saw that in the reports, in the studies, and the interviews conducted alongside the São Paulo municipality. We have not yet published the results, but I can share them. I can share that gender violence is always one of the main axes of any type of research. And there's something else. Speaking of violence still, Black women are more exposed to sexual violence, not only sexual violence, but racial violence too. They normally live in the peripheral areas and they need to walk a lot to access public transportation, to leave even their neighborhoods, to go to work, to do their activities. And throughout the process, they're exposed to gender violence, to harassment, and to racial violence too. These are two indicators on which we have been working for mobility. You can see them on the screen, and they observe the population percentage living in specific areas, as well as bicycle infrastructure. In Brazil, we need to understand intersectionality between race and gender. So one of the indicators is specifically aimed at Black women. As you can see in the green circles represent Black women, and blue circles account for the general population. You can see that in high and mid capacity transportation, as well as road infrastructure, Black women are generally distant from the infrastructure. This is why the mobility dynamic is marked by race. At ITDP, we have been working heavily with the interpretation of the data, trying to understand women mobility. And these are two pieces of communications that I wanted to share with you because they are pretty representative. And I'm going to read them to you. Quality public transportation will relieve the burden of submitted women. São Paulo metropolitan areas, as well as Rio de Janeiro, have more differences between general population and Black women. In green, you can see how important it is to focus on infrastructure and a scarcity of infrastructure. In pink and green, you can see that from our interviews and conversation circles, we confirmed that Black women find it more difficult to go to the city or to access active mobility. This is very interesting because Black girls tend not to ride their bike because they cannot access safe infrastructure, because there's also a relationship between Black women who live in areas without bicycle infrastructure. So finally, to extend a few recommendations of the study carried out in Recife on women, ages, and the other mobility indicators, or the indicators from São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, we have come to understand that it is key that there's an improvement in the data quality, both in everything related to violence and race. So work on data intersectionality is also very important, as well as to increase representativity in the municipalities, in decision-making positions. We need to hear women out. In Brazil, the participation and engagement of women, namely Black women, has been historically reduced, and women need to be there when decisions are made. So I would recommend you also reading these reports. Thank you very much, and I apologize for the confusion with the interpretation channels. And I would also like to invite Carolyn to take the floor now. Carolyn.
Thank you so much. My name is Caroline Mimano. I'm the Partnerships and Communications Manager at ITDP. And I will be presenting on a study we did in Cairo on women's access to public transport. Just a quick overview of ITDP in Africa. We work in Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda actively with offices. And we have a couple of projects in other countries such as Guinea, Ghana, Mozambique, among others. So this study was done in partnership with the New Urban Communities Authority, also known as NUCA, USAID, UN Habitat. You could go back to the first. Yeah, so we did this with the New Urban Communities Authority, also known as NUCA, USAID, UN Habitat, and UN Women. Yes, so we can move to the next slide. So as you can see from the image, Cairo has a population of about 100 million, which means congestion is growing and a lot of people are spending a lot of time commuting and stuck in traffic. Based on the study, we found out that about 60% of trips are by public transport. However, because of the state of public transport, there is a lot of growth in private car use, as you can see in the image, which also tells a story about the need to improve public transport. So currently, we have different kinds of transport modes in Cairo, but specifically for public transport, we have the metro, which currently has 3 lines. And we have the different kind of buses run by the Cairo Transport Authority, also known as CTA. So they have the bigger buses. And you also have the different kinds of minibuses, microbuses, Volkswagens, and vans, either run by private companies or by individuals. So the major issues with these public transport systems include overcrowding. There's just not enough fleet size to accommodate the demand. And then, which also leads to very long waiting time for the public transport passengers. The other issues, as you can see from the image, is the step on the bus is very difficult for women, young children, and people with disabilities to use the public transport buses, which also leads to more time in trying to get to these buses. It's very uncomfortable for these women. There are also very poor conditions for the public transport terminals, poor lighting, there's no lighting, there's no paving, and the state of the paratransit vehicle is also not very good, which makes it very uncomfortable for people to use. So to improve on all these things, we did recommend bus rapid transit. One, because just keep clicking, you can. Yeah, because with bus rapid transit, one, it's more affordable and moves a large number of people at a fraction of the cost of other modes of transport, such as the metro. But in addition, you get clean and high capacity buses. There's no issue with boarding because you pre-board, so there is off-board payment, so it's easier to get in and out of the bus. The stations are designed based on capacity, so there is no overcrowding. They are secure, they are safe, they have lighting. And then you have a dedicated bus lane, so you don't have to spend a lot of time commuting from one place to another. In addition, there is fast and last mile access because there is provision for pedestrian lanes and cycle lanes. So this study was done as part of the Cairo corridor BRT corridor. So we have the Ring Road BRT in the red and the green. So this is currently under construction. And then we have the Western Corridor BRT, which we helped plan and currently are working on the designs. So this is from the industrial city, 6th of October into Giza. So it is, we just can keep going. So in order to understand the status of this corridor, so we did a couple of surveys. So we did the frequency occupancy gender count, which basically counts the number of people in each vehicle, but just this one focuses on the number of women, the number of children, and then the number of men. So this is very specific to the gender in the kind of people in these vehicles. We also did interviews with operators so that we can understand if they understood the issues that women face. And we also looked at the state of the terminals and tried to understand how people move, the status of the terminals. Are they okay? Are they safe? Are people comfortable moving from one place to another? And then also try to understand what are the patterns of commutes. We had a couple of focus group discussions with women cyclists, women with disabilities, and different women groups in the different cities that make up the Greater Cairo so that we can understand the issues they face. So this included things like the fares. Do they feel like the fares are affordable? We tried to understand if they felt safe, if they felt harassed, if they felt comfortable using the public transport system. We also did online surveys on travel patterns so that we can get a wider group of people and understand the issues they are facing. And we also went around all these areas to look at the physical state of the terminals and the corridors so that we can understand how the public spaces and the streets contribute to the issues that women face. Yeah, so this is an image of one of the focus groups we did. And the other is an image of the focus group with the women with disabilities. So these are some of the findings that came out of the surveys and the study. One, the fact that out of the study, we realized that women don't travel a lot. Only 25% of public transport passengers were women, which goes to say that women don't move around as much. But also, a lot of them did feel harassed because 80% of the women surveyed said they formed some form of harassment in their journey that could be from walking to the bus stop, to standing at the bus stop, to getting into the bus and within the bus. So within all that journey, at some point they did feel harassed. As mentioned earlier by some of my colleagues, we also did find out that women's journeys had more varied purposes, as you can see from the graphs. A lot of men just went to work, education, and entertainment, but for women, they also included personal reasons and shopping, which also then meant they had more varied work purposes rather than just, work and education. A lot of women also mentioned that they spend more than 2 hours or more on their daily commutes. And this also speaks to the issue that I had mentioned earlier. A lot of buses and paratransit vehicles are stuck in traffic because of the level of congestion in the city. And also because a lot of women felt like a lot of women transferred more than once in their journey, then there was some wait time in moving from one vehicle and getting into another. So from the study, we realized 70% of the passengers transferred at least once to finish their trip. So there was also a lot of overcrowding, especially in the CTA buses. And a lot of women pointed that out as the major reason behind the harassment and the lack of security. So as you can see from the graph, the CTA buses had the highest, women felt less secure using the CTA buses. So there were also some operational issues in the sense that a lot of drivers were overspeeding, and that made the women feel unsafe, but also in the sense that they were being harassed by the operators of these microbuses, and they didn't see that as a bad thing. So this contributed to two issues: a gender issue in the sense that the women didn't feel safe to use these buses, but also an operational issue in the sense that a lot of the drivers were overspeeding. So now moving into the recommendations, we did propose, it's very important to have an adequate bus fleet, just so that you can reduce the overcrowding that's leading to the harassment. We also recommended women-only compartments, just because this has been working well with the metro. So the metro has women-only sections, and that has been working well, and the level of harassment is not as high as when using the buses. The other thing is making sure that we have inclusive station and terminal designs. As you can see from the image, this is an image of the BRT system in Jerusalem. It's important to have level boarding so that for passengers to get in and out of the buses. It also has enough lighting, and it is designed to capacity, reducing overcrowding. It's also important, especially for women, to make sure that we have things like baby changing areas, toilets, shops, so that they can buy anything that they need. And these things are very important because they're overlooked when designing stations and terminals. For corridors, it's very important to think about the different users of the streets. If a lot of people are using public transport, then it's important to design public transport in a comfortable way that moves people more efficiently, and that's affordable. As you can see from the image, they have tabletop crossings that makes movement from one side of the street to another more comfortable. And they also have walking lanes and cycle lanes, making sure that there's ease of movement in and out of the station. Other things that could be included are things like tactile paving, just so that it's easy for people with disabilities to move in and out of the stations. So it's very important to have a look at all the users and have a bigger picture of whatever everyone needs and incorporate that into the designs. So a lot of women also did say that they're being harassed in the streets as they walk. And by having mixed land use, you have a mixture of shops and offices and active streets that make people feel safe. So if you have people walking in a street and people seated outside having drinks in a cafe, then a lot of people walking along that street would feel more safe. So our recommendation is to have mixed land use that involves different kinds of uses along the street, so that women walking, especially at night, can feel more safe. We also recommended having more women in operations and planning roles, just so that if you have more diversity, then you're more responsive to the needs of all the users, especially because women understand the issues of other women, and people with disabilities also understand the issues people with disabilities face. So the system is overall more inclusive of everyone and their needs. We also recommended campaigns against harassment, the need for safety and security, especially among the operators and the other commuters who are also men, and the general public, so that they can understand why they should move against harassment and how they should just make sure that the public transport system is more inclusive. That's it, and thank you.
Okay, thank you all for these presentations. It's amazing to hear so many details about what's really happening in cities in order to improve the way women move around the cities. We don't have a lot of time for questions. We have some good ones on the chat. I will ask the presenters to answer as much as possible in a written way in the Q&A box so that we can answer as much as possible. But I will read some of the questions that came up. So one I would like to go first is the question that was put in the Q&A box by Pariraja to Carol, who is interested to know on which type of public transport system, organized or unorganized, your study was based.
Okay, yeah. So he's asking if, I'm not sure if he's asking about the study or in general about the public transport system in Cairo. So basically, the bus system is paratransit apart from the CTA because that's the Cairo Transport Authority that operates that. And then we have the metro, which we can call an organized system, but apart from that, the rest of it is paratransit.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carol. We have another question from Jan, also about Cairo. I assume small buses, vans will still be necessary as feeders for the BRT in Cairo. Are there plans to enhance these feeder systems in terms of gender, in addition to simply adding a BRT system? And if so, how will gender issues be addressed in that sense? If you can be brief in your answer, it's going to be useful. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, even if we have BRT, which which Cairo is constructing right now, it's not going to be enough to make sure that it serves the whole population in Cairo. So it's very important to also address the issues with paratransit. So yes, one of the recommendations that we have offered is making sure that you have an expanded fleet size that matches the demand. That's very important. We are also working with the New Urban Communities Authority, NUCA, to map out the paratransit system in Cairo. And then that will help us understand who these people are, which routes they operate, the kind of demand they have, and how then we can improve so that people can use a modernized bus system in addition to using the BRT system. So in that sense, the recommendations would come once the mapping is done. But for this one, this was just an overall study, but also recommends having a bigger fleet size in addition to having women-only sections in the buses.
Thanks, Carol. We have a question from Talia to Lorena. She's curious to know what are some of the main initiatives happening in Brazilian cities to help improve the access of women, especially Black women, to public transportation. Can you please comment on that, Lorena, very quickly?
Okay, I think I should mention São Paulo. São Paulo is implementing a working group to discuss violence and gender. And this is a thing related with our study in São Paulo. And Recife, that has a secretariat to focus on early childhood. So I think these two initiatives are good examples happening here in Brazil, but I understand that we have a long way to go in this discussion.
Thanks, Lorena. And then finally to Engi, I would like to ask her how she sees e-mobility as an opportunity to create more equitable systems for women. Can you reflect on that, Engi, please?
So thank you, Anna. So maybe I want to quote one of our recommendations and results of our study. So for the ride-hailing electrification, for example, we see this kind of like an opportunity for women to also join and also participate within the system, since like it will also help them to get more opportunity to increase or even like to step up in their socioeconomic conditions. Because of, as we understand, within this kind of like really recent situations, women are dominating the gig economy, and they are mostly participates within this kind of like as informal workers. But then when we are really addressing their participations within this kind of like transition process, we will ensure that they will have this kind of like equal opportunities and safe environment, just like to also will impact to their economic and their roles within the societies and also families.
Thank you very much, Angie, Lorena, and Carol. Unfortunately, we don't have more time for questions, but before we finish, I would like to reinforce some recommendations that are deeply part of ITDP's work to mainstream gender as part of the mobility planning. Cities should plan for women, including them explicitly in planning process and policy frameworks, including collecting gender disaggregated data and setting goals and targets for meeting the travel needs of women, as we saw in some examples that were presented today. Cities should also provide inclusive transport services that meet different travel patterns and needs beyond commute. It includes making sure frequent and reliable transport services are available all day. It also includes having fair policies that allow for trip chaining and integration with other modes. And finally, designing vehicles for women, including safety aspects. By doing that, we hope women and girls feel free to move around the cities, access opportunities, and that they can do so with dignity and in a sustainable manner. The challenge is very big, but we hope that the presentations today can inspire us to move forward in this direction. So thank you very much for joining us today in this webinar, and I hope we can meet again soon.
Thank you so much to the presenters, to you, Anna, for moderating, and of course, our audience for joining us today. So even though we run out of time, we hope these conversations will really keep going, and they do emphasize that cities can, in fact, be inclusive for all. So be on the lookout for the next events in ITDP's event space. The link is shared in the chat. Also, if you are interested in issues around mobility for caregivers, babies, and toddlers, and the work ITDP has been doing for this specific user group, please register for the upcoming workshop. The link is in the chat as well. So thank you so much for the rich presentations and these interactions today. I will see you again soon. Bye all.